lined up already. Thank you to the people who answered my appeal. For a while, it looked like we had nobody booked at all for our next few sessions, and then everybody piled in. And we are fully booked up until well into, we've got a couple of slots in January, and then we're booked up in February and March. So thank you to those people who volunteered. And as I was just saying, don't forget, we've got a Broadside Day extra in Dublin on the 15th of October, and that'll be online as well. Go to the TSF website to book a ticket for that, either online or in person in Dublin. It's free, so you can. I hope to see you all there. And as we were just saying, November also is the FDIS Vaughan Williams conference, 12th and 13th of November. So lots of things to keep you folkies all occupied and happy. So we're going to go to Derek first of all today. As always, remember, if you want to say something, you go down to reactions, isn't it? And raise your hand. Don't raise your hand on the screen because I can only see some of you, not all of you. Hi there, Derek, then.
All right. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Steve and Martin and Vic and. This is nice because I last spoke for TSF last October. So this is like a where are they now kind of edition. For those of you that weren't present for my last talk, I was sort of outlining some of the work that I'd done in the American South, mostly tracking a woman who was recorded in the 30s for the WPA by Herbert Halpert. Her name was Lena Turbeville. I've since curated a bunch of her recordings and released them on a London label called Death Is Not the End. And I met a lot of her family members, but I'm here to talk about a separate project that's sort of been in the works in the last 3 years, but also has deeper roots. So I'm going to kind of explain the background of that project, and then we're going to kind of walk through it on the web page because it's a public web page. So the deeper roots that I'm referring to, when I was like 16 or 17, I got my first mobile phone, and my grandma at the time was like 89. And she was like my favorite person. She was just like really spry and like had a lot of stories. She never sang, but she had like a lot of kind of eccentric jobs and old blue blood kind of situations in her life that she would like talk about all the time. So sort of clandestinely, I started recording her on my mobile phone. It's probably like a flip phone, and then later got an iPhone. And being 89, I was like, yeah, you know, let's like grab this now because who knows, you know, how much longer I'm gonna have with her. And she ended up actually living to be 99. So I got a 10-year kind of spine of experiences, and they weren't all stories. Sometimes I just like put my headphones on and it's like I'm having tea with her again or something. It's really nice. But when she passed away in 2018, I kind of sat down and checked the metadata and like made sense of the kind of litany of recordings, fragments of her. I'd been making my own music for 10 years at that point, but not really folkloric. So this was kind of informal autoethnography, first blush, that I wasn't like aware of. So yeah, I have them all like in an iTunes playlist or whatever, and it's really healing to be able to kind of walk through like the decade that I had documented of her. And then like flash forward to like a year and a half later, I was listening to Lena Turbeville, who was born in 1905, lived in Elk Park, North Carolina, which is right on the border of Tennessee. And when Dr. Halpert made his Southern expedition in 39, just before the war, he captured Lena, some of her family members, some people in the surrounding area, obviously went through not just North Carolina, but Virginia and all sorts of places. But Lena was one of the best singers I'd ever heard. And I really wanted to save her repertoire from languishing on the shelves at the Library of Congress. So I contacted them, and I was going to like curate her recordings or whatever, because there were only 2 that were released. There was like 36 otherwise. And then COVID happened. So I was kind of stuck, like nesting, thinking about this woman, like yearning for these recordings. And I ended up getting in touch with her family, made a couple of trips down to Elk Park. And at the time, Nikki Pritchard was still alive. And I was able to sort of document her singing not only some of the songs from the WPA project, but also some other things she remembered her mom singing. And Nikki was sort of what I would think of as a non-singer, because even her own children, she might have like hummed around the house, but her kids don't remember her like singing folk songs and keeping that tradition kind of honed like in her family. But yet she could recall her mother's repertoire and some things that I wasn't even aware that Lena was singing, because you only have so many discs, you know, in the 30s. So that was like a really rich experience, and it like tapped back into kind of the work that I'd been doing with my grandmother informally. And I was like, okay, this feels like a much more like formal sort of autoethnography, kind of like dip into like not just the songs, but someone's life. You know, at this stage, I think of the songs as like the banner headline, and then the person's life that they lived as like the article. You don't just read the headline over and over all morning, you read the article. So I formed a really deep relationship with Lena's daughter, and she sang many things for me. And when I'd gone to North Carolina at first, I'd made some trips organically, like to other members of the family. And I also met this banjo maker called Charlie Glenn, who knew a bunch of kind of more religious songs. Lena sang mostly play party and cowboy songs, but also like child ballads. And then Charlie sang things like The Sweet By and By, kind of more of a religious flavor. And I just got back a month ago from living in Elk Park for 4 months, which is like a town of 500 people on the border of Tennessee. So the fact that I even kind of found rent down there was like unbelievable. Like who had a house available this summer? It was kind of crazy. So did a lot of deeper memory work with like Lena's nieces and grandkids. Found out that Lena could, there's this Appalachian tradition of talking fire out of a burn, where you kind of like breathe on it and kind of, I guess the standard prayer, although people have their own, is two saints came in from the north, one bearing fire, one bearing frost, in frost, out fire. So she healed one of her niece's burns, apparently. So I got kind of goodies visiting with Lena's family, but I also kind of went to some of the established musicians in the region. This was from April till August. And before I left, I was also up in Connecticut, where I am now in the Northeast, talking to barn dance callers. And there's a town a bit north of me called West Cornwall, pretty Appalachian in flavor. I met a few fiddle players there and did some recordings. So all of this sort of cumulative effort. Oh, and I don't know if anybody remembers from my talk last year, but I was also in York for 4 months last year and did a bunch of recording there. Not so many ballads, but some music hall songs, a couple of child ballads, a really nice version of Jolly Fellows That Follow the Plow, which used to be everywhere and is now like nobody sings it. I don't know why it fell out of favor, but that used to be like the lowest rung British song, and now it's like not even there. So Will Noble and his wife did that for me. I begged them to stoop and sing Jolly Fellows That Follow the Plow. So I got a bunch of neat things, in these three areas: the Northeast, the American South, and Britain. And I placed an advertisement, I guess the British would say, in the Dalesman in Yorkshire, their magazine, before I left. Just begging people if they knew songs to email me or call me. And I did get this woman who I'll play the clip in a minute. Like 6 months later, I think someone passed this issue of the Dalesman on to her, and she like sent me an email that her grandfather had been a sea captain, and she sang this song for me down WhatsApp, and I recorded her or whatever. So all of this kind of cumulative song catching, I sort of promised myself that if I made it to like 200 or 300 recordings, I would like do something with them formally, because I think my practice had been a little bit nebulous before that. Like I'd show up with my recorder and people didn't maybe quite understand why, or maybe like happy to share what they remembered, but then it was kind of like, see you later. So yeah, I promised myself when I hit like a good round number, you know, I would like do something with them. And that could have looked like submitting them to App State or UNC or something, but I'm not really a fan of bureaucracy. I don't know if anyone really here truly is. I guess I have no patience for it. So I founded what I call the Fieldwork Archive, which is my own website that I set up last month. I have to give a lot of thanks to my assistant Claudio, because I thought this was going to like take months, and he made it happen in like a week. I was amazed. And like all of the different versions of like Barbara Allen or Four Nights Drunk, you know, I thought he'd like glitch and, you know, put someone's version where someone else's name, but no, he got it all like totally right. The infrastructure is like flawless. I'm really impressed. So we kind of set this up together in the last month, and my hope for the project is that it will bring some more non-singers forward, people that don't generally sing, but might remember their grandparents singing, like this woman that sang down WhatsApp to me. And so I've had a couple of experiences with that. And I think at this point, I'll share my screen and just kind of walk you through the website, kind of where it's at now, what my hopes are for it, and then I'll play a few kind of highlights. Yeah, so let's just dive right into that. Okay. So this is the landing page. If you go to fieldwork-archive.com, what I try and do is keep an up-to-date PDF of all of the songs, so that if people want to download it and peruse it at their own kind of leisure, there's a download link. But it's also just, you could just like, you know, zoom in and see what's like the latest thing, you know. So like I went to a barn dance caller on the 5th. She sang me a bunch of songs. You can see all the September 5th entries. But if you go to the top of the page, there's that handsome young man, Derek, at the American Folklife Center. So there's an about, but I also thought it was really important to put a responsibility statement on the page. Some people have disagreed, but I think because there's a few choice words in the collection, that it's important to kind of, you know, say that this is a, you know, document of a particular era and may not reflect current attitudes. So there's that as well, just to cover those bases. But you go back to the main page. I've tried to make this really like anti-academic. I've tried to make it really casual lending library style. So you can browse by title. You can browse by catalog number, which is like the order the songs are in, or you can browse by tags. And I humorously left the child ballad tag in, because I think 100 years ago, a lot of people suffered from what they called, you know, child ballad fever. Like you had to find the child ballads, and it was really important. So it's just kind of like, I don't actually care that much, but it's there. And then just by location mostly, I have a few songs with added verses, meaning that the singer has incorporated their own text into an established ballad. For instance, I had this man sing When the Work's All Done This Fall, and I'll go to the end and you can kind of hear how he sort of tied a new verse in.
At daybreak, no tombstone for his head, nothing but a little slab, but this is all it said. For Charlie died at daybreak, he heard the master call. Now he'll not see his mother when the work's all done this fall. And that ended it.
Uh-huh.
And then I said, well, I don't like that. I wrote, then he met her up in heaven singing in an angel band, and now they sing together in that promised land. We could do the same, folks, just be ready when he calls, and we can sing forever when the work's all done this fall.
So once in a while you get like an invention from a singer, which I think is pretty neat. Like you can find people that have sort of added on to like the established base of the song. I also have a few original songs, not many, but Bobby McMillan, Charlie Glenn, and Orville Hicks, who are all old-time musicians from the American South, have written a few originals, and I don't think any of them were recorded ever. So just even though I'm chasing kind of traditional songs learned through oral tradition, I thought it was important that these kind of get documented too. So those are part of the tags. And then you have telephone recording, which is if I can't be in the space with someone, obviously they can call me. And so that's where you get this. And I have to thank Steve Gardam, who I don't know, I can't tell if he's on this meeting right now or not, but he found the, this is the woman that found me through the Dalesman, Sandra, but he found the broadside to this mystery song really quickly. Yeah, thank you to Steve Gardam for that. But anyway, I'll play this in full and then I'll go through just a few more highlights of the collection. But yeah, this is the one I'd written a letter to the editor on the Dalesman, and I was like, if anyone knows some music, you know, this was like November last year, and she got in touch in like June or July, so better late than never.
Robert Watson, 1876.
And do you know the name of the town that he was born in?
Robin Hood's Bay. Anyway, I'll sing it here as I remember it. Patsy Dooligan, he went to school again, he went to the barber's to get a penny decent shave. He had lovely whiskers on, Galligan whiskers on, and glad that barber he did behave. No, bad that barber he did behave. He talked and he lathered and he jawed and he blathered till he got one side of Patsy's face so nice and clean. Then he went to the other side, the clock he spied, and he said, tomorrow I will finish your shave. For I've worked 8 hours this day, and I think I've earned my pay. Keep your whiskers on till the morning, John, 'cause I won't work half a minute longer. Do you want me to sing it again and get it right this time?
Yeah, go ahead then.
Right. Patsy Dooligan, he went to school again, he went to the barber's to get a penny decent shave. He had lovely whiskers on, Galligan whiskers on, and bad that barber he did behave. He jawed and he lathered and he talked and he blathered till he got one side of Patsy's face so nice and clean. Then he went to the other side, the clock he spied, and he said, tomorrow I will finish your shave. For I've worked 8 hours this day, and I think I've earned my pay. Keep your whiskers on till the morning, John, 'cause I won't work half a minute longer. I only remember him singing that. He was a sea captain, and he probably knew more risque songs than that. But anyway, that was the one he used to sing to his children.
Yeah.
We came to live with my granny and granddad when I was about 3 or 4.
So that was like a treasure, right? I love that she reached out and then you know, had that experience with her. Another one I really like, this started in person and ended up as a telephone recording. I had gone to Todd, North Carolina, which is a fairly significant historical town in North Carolina, Western North Carolina. And the Todd General Store was a location where you'd have like, yeah, song gatherings and hootenannies and fiddle circles and whatever. And it burned down. And I like went over to like the 2-year anniversary of the burn downing. And you know, it was like a horrible accident, and I met the owner who was like trying to rebuild it and stuff. And the only other thing in Todd really like up the street was like a bakery, and there was this woman running the bakery, and I asked her like what I'm asking everyone at this point, you know, who's like any person, you know, I'm like, did your parents or grandparents ever sing? And she was like, yeah, my mom sang this one song, she called it the Chapels of France, and she sang it for me in person over the counter, but I wasn't like, didn't have my equipment. And it stayed in my head, this Chapels of France thing. So I didn't have time to go visit her again because it's quite a drive to Todd from where I was in Elk Park. But I called her up and I was like, you know, this Chapels of France thing, can you please like sing it again and I'll try and figure out what the heck it is. And so she did. And it ended up, I was Googling it and like not finding it because my French is terrible. And it ended up actually being this thing called, I'm going to butcher this, Le Carillon de Vendôme, which is a children's song from like 1420. And she learned it from her mom, who learned it from a bunch of French nuns in Cincinnati. And my guess is that they probably sung this song unbroken for the last 600 years somehow coming over. I would be very surprised if the nuns like learned it from a book. I think that probably it's been handed down from when they came over as the Sisters of the Holy something in Cincinnati. So anyway, that was like probably the oldest song in my collection, you know, Child Ballads Be Damned. This is from 1420. So that was really neat. Yeah, and then I have a couple of unknown pieces. So I may not kind of spend time on those right now for like, you know, I'll open up for questions, but yeah, this is the page. If you go to fieldwork-archive.com, there's an unknown tag. So if you know what these songs are, I would be, or there's like a minstrel story in here too. Please email me, trying to solve these a little bit. And then I'm trying to think of like what else is sort of significant. I've been doing a lot of collecting in my home state of Connecticut. So yeah, I might just like, so I'm friends with this nun who is Polish, and she sang me a couple of Polish folk songs. So I'll play a little bit of this and then maybe open up for questions.
Dzisiaj Betlejem, wesoła nowina, że Panna czysta porodziła syna. Chrystus się rodzi, nas oswobodzi, anieli grają, króle witają, pasterze śpiewają, bydlę tak klękają, cuda ogłaszają.
Were those two separate songs?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about them?
Yeah. The first song, Pójdźmy Dostoyenki, is about going to the crib to see the baby Jesus. The second song, Dzisiaj Betlejem, is about today in Bethlehem. Jesus is born and the Holy Family is together in the stable.
And you learned these in school, you said?
Yeah, we had to, I went to a Polish school. You know, they taught Polish, and we had a choir, Polish choir.
And it was
we
in
learned
Jamaica?
Jamaica, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the school?
St. Joseph's School in Jamaica, and it was an ethnic parish at that time. It was children of Polish descent were welcome and encouraged, and they taught Polish. And my sisters all taught there, and there were Polish masses and Polish classes, and mostly singing. I didn't really learn how to speak, you know, Polish, but I learned how to set the sounds and everything. Yeah, learned some simple words. All of the Polish hymns are exceptionally beautiful, in my humble opinion, and we continue to sing them on certain days in the Christmas with the sisters too, because our mother foundress, Frances Siedliska, was originally from Poland, and we have a lot of those roots.
So I've tried to stuff this page, all these pages, with as much additional media as I can, photos, transcriptions, photos of the texts if available. A goal is to get full transcriptions up so that I can implement a search bar. So if you're looking for songs about birds or knives or something, or death, you can find it like that. But anyway, I also have this kind of slightly insane wish that I'm gonna, like, I bought a typewriter and I'm gonna type every single song and transcribe it, which I've begun to do, and then make these OCR typewritten, and then you can search the typewritten PDFs. But that's like a crazy dream. I'm also renting a Zeppelin and throwing money out of it next week, so look out for that, you know. So I don't know if this is ever going to happen, but I have slowly started to add some of my favorites of typewritten and scanned, which has been kind of fun, because it's like, you know, cosplaying the 30s or something, you know. And I don't know if anyone on this call had a hand in it, but I was really impressed with the Max Hunter repository. And I built this website with the Max Hunter collection in mind because it was a really nice template to sort of start out with. I find a lot of, particularly like the Duke and UNC repositories are like really hard to navigate if you're not an academic. So a goal with this was to be anti-academic and really accessible. And so I'm constantly looking for people who want to be in the archive and have their 15 minutes. So if you like, want to email me or privately message me and you like have a song kind of this ilk that you want to contribute, I'm open to that. I'm going to play a little bit of this particular Knoxville Girl song everyone has sung, but this was also over the phone, and I love this recording because you can hear that she's clearly standing in the middle of her farm taking this call for me.
But that one, the Knoxville Girl, now she sang it quite a bit.
Do you know how the melody went?
Oh, honey, I can sing that whole song, but I ain't going to. I'll give you a few words of it. Mad little girl in Knoxville, hurt a town we all know well, and every Sunday evening out in her home I dwell. We went to take an evening walk about a mile from town. I picked a stick up off the ground and knocked the fire girl down.
It's really Frances Turberville Campbell featuring 12 chickens and a rooster. I went on to meet Frances in person and did some recording of her in person. But yeah, I love that recording because it's avec poultry. So yeah, I think this is a good place to stop and I can take some questions. And absolutely looking for contributions as well. So like I say, feel free to privately message me, or just you can visit fieldwork-archive.com. My email is on the about page, and just email me. Okay, I think I'm done.
Great, thank you very much, Derek. That must be the first time we've had a Polish nun singing on our meetings. I think that's a first for us.
Hopefully not the last.
No, exactly. While we wait to see if anybody's got any questions, don't forget to put your hands up if you've got a question. But my comment, of course, is as a proper librarian. Have you backed this up? Because you're very keen, you're very enthusiastic at the moment, but you might go off it or something might go wrong. It's the legacy that I worry about, that you should make plans now for it to be somewhere else with someone else.
Well, yeah, I mean, hats off to Claudio, my assistant, who I've been working with for 15 years. He does have like a backup on his hard drive of not only the files, but the code. So every time we update the website, he saves a recent copy of the PDF that's on the main page. And then anytime we change the HTML, he has all these RTF files of the code. So if we needed to port it somewhere else, we could. And then I also have all of the songs, like the waves from straight out of my recorder, but I've also got MP3s in iTunes that I've like put on a thumb drive. So it's backed up like several ways. And I would love to build this collection into like an institution at some point formally, but I'm a really impatient folklorist, so I wanted to just splat it up there and let people dig in, and that's been going really well so far.
Have you had many hits? I mean, do people know about it?
Well, for our more experimental UK peoples out in this audience, I just did a little one-page profile in the Wire magazine. I think they called me a DIY folklorist, which feels really apt. But yeah, so I mean, I'm also going to be in Carolina Mountain Life magazine, which is like a free distributed paper mag in Western North Carolina. That's like everyone takes it because it's free. So yeah, it's been good. And then I've gotten a couple of people that have like wanted to donate their own field work, which I haven't decided whether I'll build in or not. I think I would have to demarcate that somehow, and I haven't got my brain around that part yet. But yeah, I've had people not only want to like be in the archive, but also give me their own recordings and like have them uploaded and hosted. I haven't really decided about that part, but yes, it's been growing, which is the hope, you know. And I've gotten some a few venues and record labels have like given kind of donations for Claudio's time and server space. So I'm also accepting donations in that sense. But yes, it's been thrumming, I guess, is you know.
That's good to know. Yes, excellent. We don't have any, as I can see, nobody's got their hand up. But we've run out of your time anyway. So thank you very much, Derek. Another round of applause.
Well, thank
Great
you all.
start. And we're going to move straight on to Vic, up there in the north. Are you there, Vic? Yes, there you
I'm
are.
here, yes.
Yeah, after you then, over to you.
Right, I'll just put my screen on. The PowerPoint. Share screen. Share sound, yeah. Is that looking okay?
Yeah, we've still got the stuff down the side.
How do you get rid of that?
Did you say slideshow? Yes, I mean, we can see it fine, but we can see the...
Start your slideshow, Vic.
Sorry?
Start your slideshow.
What, my slideshow?
Start.
All right,
Start.
okay. Play from start. Right, okay.
That's it.
Start with some music then.
That's perfect.
Went to Blaydon Races, 'twas on the 9th of June, 1862 on a summer's afternoon. I took the bus for Bambra's and she was heavy laden. Away we went along Collinwood Street, that's on the road to Blayden. Oh lads, you should have seen us Gammon, passing the folks upon the road just as they were standing. Lots of lads and lasses there, and all with smiling faces, Gammon along the Scotswood Road to see the Blaydon Races.
Right, this work dates back to 2012, 10 years ago, which was of course the 150th anniversary of the Blaydon Races. And I got involved mainly, I think, through the agency of Dave Harker, who is one of the influences on this performance. And also, before I start, I have to acknowledge the help of Comrade Blayden, who was on the call today, who gave me some really valuable material towards it. But what's interesting is that I looked at the Wikipedia page on Blaydon Races, and obviously I'm not doing the right things because my research has not been picked up at all. Yet I've done it. It first of all went on the website of the Blayden Folk Club. I thought that was a good popular place to put it. And then I did it at the Tunes and Airs conference a few years ago in Sheffield. But I'll take you through it now to try and make it more widely known. So this song is sometimes called the Tyneside National Anthem. It's an iconic song. We actually know the date of its first performance. It was the 5th of June 1862 at Bambra's Music Hall, and you saw the calling card for that. And it was at the testimonial for a man called Harry Clasper, who was a famous Tyneside rower and boat designer. Rowing was big. Rowing was like football is today in 19th century Tyneside. The tune is widely known, and it's also a dance. If anyone's been to barn dances, they may well have danced the Blaydon Races. Newcastle United supporters sing the first verse and chorus, and they have a great thing. If you're in a pub when there's a home match, sort of Saturday lunchtime, they gunning along the Scotswood Road, and they'll keep it on for like a minute. It's just unbelievable until they absolutely run out of breath, and then they finish with To See the Blaydon Races. It was the regimental song of the Northumberland Fusiliers, and now of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, and it's subject of this ludicrous painting of 1903, William Irving's, painting, which formed the front cover of this CD. And this is the CD that I produced with 5 excellent Tyneside singers. 2 of them sadly now dead, the wonderful Terry Conway and Brian Watson. 3 of them still alive, and that was Benny Graham you heard singing, a fabulous singer from Stanley in County Durham. Okay, so not too much about Ridley. He was a miner who was really injured in the pit in Gateshead, where he worked, where he came from, and he really had to turn to being an entertainer, as some performers do. And his work was produced in local songbooks, and particularly the publisher Thomas Allen, who eventually produces the big Allen's Tyneside songs. It was on broadsheets, and it was on these little songbooks. The statue here is not a statue to Ridley, it's Stevenson, the great engineer, but he's one of the subjects of one of Ridley's songs. I want to say something about Tyneside song, because I don't think you understand Ridley unless you put him in the context of Tyneside song. There's an early idea that there's a genre from about the early 1800s, that there is a specific song. Early in the 19th century, John Bell produces rhymes of the Northern Bards. And then, there are various publications of Tyneside songs, often with increasing dialect, interestingly. But in the sort of mid-century period, there's development of a significant local entertainment scene. Now, there was a lot of poverty in Newcastle, but there was also a degree of affluence, because it was a very successful mining, engineering, particularly gun making. Armstrong's factory mentioned in the Blaydon Races. It was big gun making, concerns, shipbuilding, of course, the Tyne, and many of the performers who occupied these music halls, and some of them were enormous. I mean, the big Tyneside music hall near the central station is now, it was like, I forget the number, it's something like 1,500 people a night packed into it. And there were lots of singers, 3 of the most famous: Ned Corvin, I think one of the most interesting singers; Joe Wilson, one of the most famous; Keep Your Feet Still, Geordie Hinney, and George Ridley, who you see in costume on the side of the screen there. It was like a lot of 19th century performers, they did use costume for individual songs. I want to just stop for a moment and acknowledge the work of my friend and sometimes combatant, David Harker, who you might hear him mentioned in the next paper to be presented, because I want to just stress the positive aspect of his work. He's been working on Tyneside song in various ways since the 1970s. He recently produced 5 books, most of which he published himself. And on top of this, there's earlier work, the collection from the manuscript to John Bell and the songs of the North East Pitmen. I mean, we probably know more about North East song as a local tradition than any other because of Harker. You may not agree with him, you may not get on with him. He tends to be argumentative and interesting, but I want to acknowledge, I like him. I don't always agree with him, but I like him. Anyway, so the perpetuation of North East song is an interesting thing, and Harker does this quite well. There's this publisher, Allen's Tyneside Songs. He publishes Joe Wilson's songs, and these are on the go. And as in a changing society, people are tending to look back on the past. The flowering, as I say, is mid-century. It's 1850s, 60s, but it's being looked upon with nostalgia by the 1870s, 80s. And then in 1911, this is really crucial. Cashieside Warrington produces his 3 volumes of Tyneside songs, which contains a lot of the famous Tyneside songs that you still hear. He was called Catchy. He was a bit of a rogue, but he's the central thing. And then you get the recordings in the 20th century, and these are various. Owen Brannigan records Tyneside songs because he comes from the northeast. Someone sent me a message and mentioned the Smith Brothers. I saw the Smith Brothers, and when my gran took me as a very young child to the Brixton Empire, that their method, the Tyneside songwriters, like the old ballad writers from back to the 16th century, the common practice was to use existing tunes. And the idea of the tune, therefore, as a words carrier is important. Some people have stressed this idea of tune connotations, that tunes carry messages. That's true in some cases, I don't buy it a lot, but essentially they're very eclectic. They took any usable tune and used it. Okay, back from the digression, George Ridley. We don't have many of his songs, only 17 on the CD, and one of them he didn't write, we knew he sang it. So really 16 songs is all we have. But when you look at the tunes he used, they're quite interesting. There were 3 songs used old tunes. This is tunes like Mrs. Bond, 18th century, Old English or Old Scottish tunes. A lot of his tunes were contemporary popular songs, and it splits about evenly. Songs from the British Music Hall, of course, Cushy Butterfield goes to the tune of Pretty Polly Perkins of Paddington Green, but he used a lot of American tunes. 8 of his songs, but only 5 of his tunes. He loved the tune Whole Hog or None, and this is where the band I use on the recordings gets its name, the Whole Hog Band. And I always think that goes well with someone called Gammon, so there we are. But anyway, this is the sort of background of his songs. Now, I can't quite reconstruct the way I put this all together, but I know about 10 years ago I was looking at the early development of the banjo. And what's interesting is there's a plethora of banjo tutors from the second half of the 19th century, and they contain a lot of contemporary material. Tom Briggs is the first one, 1855. He was dead by then, but his banjo tutor came out. And then, you know, famous ones, Buckley's, Converse's. There's a good site, Classic Banjo, which you can download most of these, and they contain a lot of contemporary tunes. So if you're in search of tunes, you don't have to go that far. Okay, so you notice that on the broadsheet I showed earlier, it said to the tune of Brighton, and I think the first thing was the discovery of the tune Brighton. I've found it in a number of places. You see it there from Frank Converse's, the top one, Frank Converse's banjo tutor, easy piece. It's not that easy the way he's got it actually, it's quite tricky. But from the Eclipse tutor, there's quite a straightforward version of the tune. Now, I'll just play you a little bit of that tune. I've got my little tenor banjo here. So this is On the Road to Brighton, roughly, something like this. It sort of goes like that. It's pretty repetitive. It doesn't do a lot, but there we are. Okay. The method I developed was to try and do musical comparison. So you see at the top here, there's the Blaydon Races. Slightly different in this older version, but and you see underneath and the lines between the two show where the notes coincide. So my conclusion from this is that at about a 60% level on the beat, the 4 beats in the bar, the single beat level, there's a coincidence. They don't sound particularly the same. But there's a strong coincidence between the tune, and I'm quite interested in using this method. I'd used it on another tune as well, just to show how it works. Here's the old Zip Coon tune. Now that's in the same collection quite often as a tune called the Rose Tree. obviously people perceive them as separate tunes, but again, when you do the comparison, and you have to do some jiggery pokery, you see on the bottom line of the text there isn't, you know, it left a gap, but there's a lot of coincidence between the shorter tune and the longer tune. And I think this is one way of approaching. There are other ways looking at things like tune structures, harmonic structures and so on. But I mean, my conclusion is that the Blaydon Races is a version, a sort of slightly different, less ornate version of the On the Road to Brighton. So the tune comes from the USA. When we look at the text, and here this is where Conrad Blayden was particularly useful in providing one of these texts, we have the Blaydon Races plot, which is a bus trip. It's about a bus trip from Bamburgh's, this pub, music hall in the centre, near the central station in Newcastle. The bus wheel flies off and gets repaired, and all sorts of, lots of interesting local detail. The local doctor is named, the Armstrong's factory is named. Even at the end, Ridley puts an ad in for his concert he's going to do the night of the Blaydon Races in Blayden. You see, the plot of On the Road to Brighton is different. It's a couple of lads who hire a horse and wagon, and they go from, now Brighton, of course, is not Brighton, Sussex, it's Brighton, Massachusetts, just outside Boston, near Cambridge. And there's no wheel flying off, but there's a fight. The two versions are quite different, the two American versions on the right-hand side. They're taken to the station. In one case, they're fined and ridiculed. In the other case, they sort of escape, and then they go into more drinking. What's really interesting is the choruses. Oh, my lads, you should have seen us ganning. I've lived up here a long time, but I can't do Geordie. We passed the folks along the road just as they were standing. Oh my, you ought to see us going. 240 in the sand and the old horse are blowing. Oh Lord Gowes, you ought to see us going. You see, I think that the linking between those two texts really makes it sort of clear that Ridley made his song from seeing that version. Okay, let's have another little digression and talk about blackface minstrelsy. It came to England about the 1830s when Thomas Rice, Daddy Rice, pictured on the top right there, dressed up as Jim Crow in blackface. Seemingly he bought his clothes from an old stable hand, a black stable hand. He was the first blackface performer to make an impact. But the 1840s saw the coming of the Virginia minstrels and of Joe Sweeney, pictured in the middle there. Great banjo player in blackface. But I want to point out one thing. Some people sort of argue blackface was harmless. Now, Frederick Douglass, the great anti-slavery campaigner, lived in Newcastle for a couple of years when George Ridley was a kid, actually. They lived probably about a mile and a half apart. And he described blackface performers as the filthy scum of white society, who have stolen from us a complexion denied them by nature, in which to make money and pander to the corrupt taste of their fellow citizens. And if you look through particularly the black press in the USA, you'll find lots of feelings of, you know, the discomfort on the part of African Americans so it isn't something new, this sensibility. It's something that goes back a long way. So, on Tyneside, minstrelsy was very popular. It's not surprising that Ridley picked up a lot of his tunes from minstrelsy. The Christian minstrels were formed in the early 1840s. They came over here, they were performed in front of Queen Victoria, and the name became almost generic. We had in Newcastle the Newcastle Amateur Christy Minstrels. I mean, Christy was a guy. It was a family, in fact. And you'll find numerous reports, and I would refer everybody to Michael Pickering's excellent academic but wonderfully accessible book on blackface minstrelsy in Britain. I was with Michael when he lost all the notes to this book because someone stole his car. Tragic, but not the point of my exercise. He remade it and wrote an excellent book. It was a pervasive influence, minstrelsy. It was oddly respectable and yet racist genre. And it's not surprising in a way that when we trace them, the Tyneside songwriters used high proportion of minstrel songs and tunes. So to summarise, so that new words to existing tunes tradition carried on in the 1850s and 60s, and about half of Ridley's surviving songs make use of minstrel tunes. So in Blaydon Races, neither the tune nor the text are directly taken from On the Road to Brighton, but it's clearly derived from that song. I think it's a better song, actually. They're adapted to the Tyneside musical tradition, to Tyneside song as a judgment. It's amazing it survived. Two of Ridley's songs have really survived. Blaydon Races is one, Cushy Butterfield is the other one. I really think it's that Blaydon Races, make a value judgment here, but it's a much better song. It's a much more interesting song than either of the versions I've seen. We can discuss whether this is cultural exchange or cultural appropriation. To me, culture is always in process and there's always going to be borrowings and so on. So I thank those who have helped me with this work. Wikipedia hasn't caught up with my research, and this is maybe why I'm restating it again. I don't do Wikipedia, but there we are. It's someone else could maybe mention that we do have this here, because it's really quite misleading, the article. I'm stopping sharing and finishing there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. Excellent, excellent as always. You may have said this, I may have fallen asleep, I don't know. But is On the Road to Brighton, is that a minstrel song?
Yes, it is.
Right.
In one of the versions, it's quite clearly two. I won't use it. I got told off. I always feel one should use the language in context, but I got told off once for doing it, so I won't do it again. But it mentions that they're blackface performers, two of the guys in the, and it was performed by minstrel performers. We know that, yes, in the States.
Right.
It is.
I mean, a lot of things were performed by minstrels, but not necessarily written.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about its origins. You know, like a lot of songs where we just don't know where they sort of appear, and we don't know where they come from. I mean, Blaydon Races is interesting that we can give a date of the first publication of the thing. That's quite something, I think.
Yeah. Okay, we have two questions. Conrad. Hello, Conrad.
We're back doing Blaydon Races again. We've been working on it for years. The part we're working on now is the Smith brothers, the 5 Smith brothers.
Yeah.
Because they represent what we call variety music as opposed to music hall. It's a subtle difference. But they recorded, of all the Newcastle, Northumbrian folk tunes, of which I've recorded many in my database, they have chosen 5 songs, or maybe 7, to record and 78s, and was also picked up later, remastered. It's brand new LPs. So what in the world are they doing choosing those songs, those particular ones? As he said, it was Cushy Butterfield, Blaydon Races, a couple of others, but there are lots of fine tunes out there, and we wonder why they picked those. The other thing is they pride themselves as being from Newcastle. That was one of their main draws in the early period. They eventually discovered that Scotland was loaded with money and golf courses, and went over there and toured all the time. But what one wonders is, why didn't they stick with the rest of the repertoire instead of going over and playing bagpipe-laced funny songs for the Scots? So that's what they were doing was marketing. So what is Blaydon Races? And it becomes a marketing tool. And it has done that as part of what I consider branding. The people in the pits did not necessarily sing the popular printed songs. They sang all their songs, probably more dirty songs, and a lot of instrumental dance music. That's what's recorded in letters of the time. So what they're doing with the marking, trademarking of the culture is keeping the people at a distance who are outsiders, defining themselves, and at the same time making the culture fascinating. All these strange people in the music, they want to see them. They're coming there, they want to attract development and residents. So while that's happening, they're the audience of the printed songs. The minors are playing their own stuff, and it's all a system. But it's a great song. I've recorded now about 100 contemporary versions recorded on CDs recently. 100 of them. What in the world's going? Why would anybody want to do another version of Blaydon Races? It's in every genre. It's in every different kind of beat. And why are they all there? That seems like a stretch. Must be something going on. I would like to know what that is. What's the draw? Why are people susceptible? And it's a fascinating way that this works. Just like Wassail songs. Taking hundreds of those. Why are we doing hundreds of Wassail songs in the 20th century? I don't know. But it's an interest point. And if anybody knows anything about the Smith brothers, they are all over the place. Lots of announcements of concerts. They have put out quite a few records, only one hit. I Believe in Friendship. That's a good song. It was out on 78. And Smith brothers were well known, but nobody sat down and took down their intimate details of daily life and such. But we're going to be looking at the qualities that the newspapers push in the advertisements. Why are they telling you to go see Smith Brothers?
I did see the Smith Brothers live. My granny took me, I could only have been about 5, to the Brixton Empire, and we saw the Smith Brothers, and they were really, really something. I mean, my gran loved them. She was a Cockney from London. She loved the Smith Brothers, these Geordie lads who sang, you know, and put on this real act of being stage Geordies, you know. And there was a lot of stage Geordie about. I think the filter is Catchaside Warrington. He filters down this vast body of Tyneside song into a few, 36 songs in the 3 books. Right. And all the ones you hear today tend to be in Catchaside Warrington.
I put him up online. He's on my webpage.
Yeah, there's 3 volumes. I've got them here, and you know, he really is the filter, and he makes recordings and so on in the early 20th century. I think.
Could we move on? Because John Baxter's got his hand up. Thank you, Conrad. John?
Yeah, I think you may have answered my first question already, which was how far back have you taken the trip to Brighton? Because I've not been able to find out very much, but I did trace it back to the title to 1822, and there was several theatre productions around the story of a mad trip to Brighton.
That it's not Trip to Brighton though. It's On the Road to Brighton.
Okay.
That may be a different thing. I mean, there's if you look at tunes and songs, the Brighton really is a very common subject.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a dance tune. It's 18th century dance tune, the Trip to Brighton, which I play sometimes, and it's On the Road to Brighton. I've just got these 2 texts from the USA. I mean, there could well be more. I'd be very interesting if we could find out more about the origin of the song.
Because there was a sort of broadsides, aren't there broadsides?
Yeah, one's a broadside, one's in the songster.
Yeah, I think
the 2 that we've got.
I'll have a look.
There was quite a well-known cartoon come artwork published and sold in the 1820s called A Trip to Brighton, and I did wonder whether it was related to the song.
This really seems to be Brighton in Massachusetts, which was a centre of, it was cattle trading centre, but also a place for having a good time. You went there to get drunk and have a booze up, you know. It was that sort of place.
Like Brighton.
Like Brighton today, I suppose, but like Brighton in Sussex now. But you know, I don't. You know, I think it's just a coincidence that both get into song.
That other one is not the same.
Thank you, Conrad. We must move on now. Thank you very much to Vic and everybody for joining in. And our last speaker for today is Brian Peters.
Hello.
We'll talk about Ross Cole's, well, it's not a new book anymore, I suppose, but it's newish. Over to you, Brian.
Okay. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. And start from the beginning is a good place to start. You seeing that?
Yes, we are.
Good.
You need to start your show. That's it. Perfect.
Okay. Late last year, I received for review in the Folk Music Journal a book written by a Cambridge academic by the name of Ross Cole. The Folk is a collection of essays grouped loosely around the theme of the folkloric imagination, the way in which folklorists construct a narrative from the data, and is concerned principally with the folk revival in Edwardian England, although it also touches on Black America. Cecil Sharp is painted as a proto-fascist, while the movement of which he became the leader is claimed to have invented the concept of folk music in defiance of the facts of vernacular culture. The book takes its place in a long line of publications that are so skewed in their attacks on Cecil Sharp that accuracy and proper scholarship are sometimes cast out of the window. I'll begin by reviewing some previous examples. Until the 1980s, Sharp's reputation remained generally high. The tireless promotion of his theories by his disciple Maud Carpeles and the rose-tinted biography that she published cast him in an uncritically positive light. But in 1985, Dave Harker's Fake Song appeared, firing a broadside into the heart of the folk song movement. Harker attacked pretty much every folk revivalist, collector and scholar of the previous 200 years, but targeted Sharp with special venom. He had stolen songs from working people for financial gain, misrepresented their culture, selected only the songs that fitted his agenda and then altered them to suit his own ends, while his disinclination, actually on practical grounds, to make phonograph recordings of the singers was obviously an avoidance of scrutiny of doctored material. Also, according to Harker, Sharp's political alignment was hard right. Following Fake Song in 1993 came The Imagined Village by Georgina Boys, which again accused folk revivalists in Edwardian England of inventing a tradition and was also deeply critical of Sharp's conduct in his notorious dispute with Mary Neal over the direction of the Morris Dance revival. Sharp was presented as a patrician exploiter who took no interest in the singers he had located, simply draining their repertoires and escaping with the booty as fast as possible. Describing alleged bowdlerization, Boys wrote that the cultural products of the rural working class were taken from them and daintily and selectively reworked for school and drawing room consumption. Meanwhile, in the USA, Sharp's collection of Appalachian folk songs, once described by Bertrand Bronson as without question the foremost contribution to the study of British American folk song, was also coming under hostile scrutiny. Beginning with Henry Shapiro's Appalachia on Our Mind in 1978 and continuing through the work of David Wisnant and Benjamin Filene, American scholars criticized Sharp for rejecting material such as hymns, recently composed songs and fiddle tunes in a quest for ballads of exclusively English origin. Phil Jameson's study of the origins of the dance Sharp named the Kentucky Running Set accuses him of Anglo-centric bias and remarks of Sharp's song collecting that he was interested only in English music and dances, he ignored the rest. Sharp's avoidance of African American communities and a handful of tasteless remarks in his diary have led to accusations of racism, while Shapiro cited Sharp's concentration on English folk song in Appalachia as the chief source for the pervasive myth of mountain culture as Anglo-Saxon. Now, several of these sources are not without merit. Wisnant's All That Is Native and Fine is a generally excellent account of cultural politics regarding Appalachia. Jameson's Hoedowns, Reels and Frolics gives a convincing account of the African-American influence on Appalachian dance styles, and even the agenda-driven polemic of Fake Song served in its day to prick a bubble of cosy consensus and was ahead of its time in stressing the importance of broadside transmission. However, on their specific criticisms of Cecil Sharp, they are often inaccurate. Harker's assessment of Sharp's character was based on some rather creative editing of quotes from letters and diaries, while the statistical analysis of Somerset communities that he produced to support his claims about misrepresentation were comprehensively demolished by Christopher Behrman. Harker had also overstated the degree to which songs were altered for publication, wrongly asserted that Sharp concealed his editorial interventions, and failed to recognise that bowdlerizations were forced on him by his publishers. Boy's comments about his dismissive approach to the singers he met is easily disproved by reference to diary entries and letters in which he described long and lively conversations and praised their musical abilities. The categories of song Sharp is alleged to have ignored in Appalachia, hymns, recently composed pieces, African American songs, and fiddle tunes, are all to be found in his manuscripts and published collections, notably the book English Folk Songs from the Southern Appalachians, in which about 40% of the titles are of American origin. Considering that Sharp, the foremost collector of English folk songs, had been invited to Appalachia specifically to seek out Old English ballads, his approach was in fact remarkably inclusive. Critics of his racism never acknowledged that he took down songs from and made complimentary remarks about two black singers at a time when most American collectors working in the mountains visited none at all, or that he acknowledged a number of songs in his collection as having had African American origins. Nor is it generally conceded that the myth of Anglo-Saxon Appalachia was established long before Sharp's first expedition. The anti-Sharp bandwagon is now rolling with such speed that even his empirical observations, for instance those regarding gap scales in Appalachian folk song, are now asserted, quite wrongly, to have been distorted by a desire to make them appear Old English. Ross Cole's The Folk is the latest addition to this growing body of Sharp bashing publications. Many of the arguments are highly reminiscent of both folk song and the imagined village, both of which are referenced approvingly. His analysis of Hubert Parry's inaugural address to the newly formed Folksong Society in 1898, for instance, quotes almost precisely the same passages picked out by Boys. Equally familiar is the core argument that the folk and folk music never really existed, an assertion banged home repeatedly. The folk are essentially an artifact of the imagination and thus notable only by their absence. Folk song would not have existed without the discipline of folklore. The folk only ever existed in the minds of the bourgeoisie. 19th century folklorists brought something to life that had never existed before: folk song. The last statement might seem odd to those of us who know very well that musically untrained people did sing songs they'd learned from their forebears for their own entertainment, but here Cole is talking about the concept of folk song. Using the terminology of Marxist celebrity philosopher Slavoj Žižek, he describes it as an act of magical naming, although it might be less loaded to call it simply an act of naming. Another European philosopher, Michel de Certeau, is also central to Cole's thesis. De Certeau critiqued the Western tradition of ethnography, proposing that written studies of communities by outsiders are inevitably inadequate and colonialist in nature. Applying this to the folk song movement, Cole suggests that its undeniably incomplete account of popular culture is worse than no account at all, that half a loaf is worse than no bread. Moreover, he asserts that whenever we listen to folk music, it will inevitably conjure up numerous political subtexts, notably the tension between primitive, unsullied rural music against degenerate urban mass culture. Cole disapproves of such a sharp distinction. The following quote is a good illustration of his style. As the contrapuntal perspective adopted by post-colonial theorists has demonstrated, such Manichaean thinking is wholly untenable in view of the hybridities arising from globalization and the profoundly porous or interstitial nature of colonial encounter. Or to put it in more inclusive language, rural and urban cultures are not sealed off from one another. My personal experience is that folk song does not necessarily conjure up a political subtext every time I hear or perform it. I focus on tune, on tale and style. It can't be denied, though, that a dislike of urban commercialism did permeate the folk revival's thinking right up to the days of Ewan MacColl and Bert Lloyd. One of Cole's better chapters explores in detail the congruence between the ideas of the early folk song movement, as set out by Hubert Parry, for example, and those of the Romantics, in particular William Morris, who, not coincidentally, was a lover of folk music. That the folk enthusiasts and Morris's group shared a distaste for capitalism, industrialization, urban life and modernity in general is not a new idea, having been discussed previously by Boys and by Dylan Buston, but Cole's account, drawing on Ruskin and Marx, is thorough and valuable, although he doesn't mention that Cecil Sharp attended university lectures by Morris and later counted Morris's daughter amongst his followers. Another interesting essay in The Folk transports us across the Atlantic to explore the efforts of so-called folkloric thinking in relation to the songs of African Americans and the contrasting portrayals of them by white and black folklorists. John Wesley Work, black song collector and member of Fisk University's Jubilee Singers, understood that Negro spirituals were not simply outpourings of religious fervour, but expressions in a secret language of freedom, while the Jubilee Singers' musical accomplishment and great popularity challenged the perception of black folk song as primitive. There is telling commentary here on the powerful writings of the sociologist and historian W.E.B. Du Bois, who named the spirituals sorrow songs, and the novelist John Toomer, who viewed the spirituals not merely as historical artifacts, but as the foundation for a black cultural reawakening. But it's those Victorian and Edwardian folksong enthusiasts in England that Cole is chiefly concerned with, and here we see some disturbing signs of evidence having been manipulated to fit an agenda. To support his thesis that folk song as a genre was manufactured by middle-class enthusiasts, he examines the meeting between Kate Lee of the then nascent Folksong Society with Thomas and James Copper, of the famous Copper family of course, in Rottingdean, Sussex in 1898, stressing the gulf in social status and playing down the fact that these two literate men, a landlord and a farm bailiff, weren't exactly yokels. He asserts that the supposedly uncomfortable situation of meeting a posh lady in a big house led them to offer an anomalous selection of songs. One might expect to be provided with a list of songs the brothers actually performed on this occasion, set against a catalogue of their usual repertoire. But there's nothing. This is an evidence-free assertion. To make matters worse, a passage from Bob Copper's A Song for Every Season is quoted, but Bob's testimony that the whiskey-lubricated proceedings were anything but uncomfortable is taken to mean the exact opposite. Such distortion is ironic, coming from an author who complains of the erasure of the singer's viewpoint. This is far from the only example of misinterpretation. Cole accuses Cecil Sharp of presenting an unrepresentative collection of songs designed to bolster a specifically English nationalism, and spotlights an article in the Folksong Society's Journal of 1905 titled Folk Songs Noted in Somerset and North Devon. Sharp, he claims, and I quote, utilised a handful of singers from 3 small districts as indicators of the Southwest itself as a microcosm of England, and England as a politicised synecdoche for Britain. Not only does the handful of singers turn out to number 30, but the entire point of the article is blithely ignored. It was co-authored by Lucy Broadwood, Frank Kidson and Fuller Maitland, whose expertise on song collecting in different regions of the country and knowledge of printed sources was employed precisely to demonstrate the ubiquity of Sharp's Somerset songs across both England and Scotland, in published collections and on broadsides. This goes unmentioned, and the co-authors' names are conveniently airbrushed from the citation. We know, of course, that the ideas of Sharp and the other collectors were flawed, yet Ross Cole seems to assume that the opinions and theories expressed by them over a century ago still hold sway over the folk movement. Cole urges us to rescue the forgotten histories of the vernacular from the conceptual shackles of folksong, as though Steve Roud's Folksong in England had never been published. Roud's empirical focus on what ordinary people have sung over the last 4 centuries, providing an important corrective to the ideas of Sharp, is cited in Cole's biography, but at no point is it discussed. All of us now recognise the selectivity of those early folklorists, and field collectors since the Second World War have pursued a far more inclusive agenda. It's now widely accepted that the vast majority of our folk songs probably originated in cheap print, something Cecil Sharp would never have countenanced. Contrary to what is asserted here, and in the work of Harker and Boys, Sharp himself never once claimed that his collections were representative of the full spectrum of vernacular singing. Far from it. He wrote that he could have filled his notebooks with music hall, minstrel and other popular songs, and that it was necessary to work through this stratum before striking the real thing. He and his colleagues were seeking a specific class of song, defined by musical characteristics and time period, and were quite open about their rejection of My Grandfather's Clock and A Life on the Ocean Wave. The most serious misrepresentations in the folk, however, centre on Cecil Sharp's politics. It's well established that he was a long-standing member of the Fabian Society, a socialist movement favouring gradual rather than revolutionary change that is affiliated to the Labour Party to this day. He attended radical meetings, supported progressive education and prison reform, and in the latter years of his life was still expressing sympathy with striking Welsh coal miners and lamenting the injustices of capitalism. Nonetheless, Ross Cole tries his best to portray Sharp's thinking as inextricably interwoven with the political and cultural currents that would lead to the rise of fascism later in the century. In this interpretation, Sharp's misgivings about the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, coupled with his detestation of capitalism, must lead in only one direction, a desire for, quote, national socialism. And we all understand what that means. An unbiased scholar might consider it more likely that any Fabian gradualist would reject violent revolution and prefer democratic socialism, but for some reason Cole does not even consider this alternative. Instead, he cites historian Zeev Sternhell's belief that 20th century fascism had its origins in an emerging fin de siècle ideology based on nationalism, authoritarianism, and militarism, and then tries to hammer Sharp's square peg into this round hole. We are told that Sharp nursed, quote, simultaneous support for non-revolutionary authoritarian socialism and militant organic nationalism in conjunction with his antipathy toward liberal democracy and fascination with social Darwinism. Let's pick that apart. It's certainly true that Sharp was a nationalist, albeit at a time when such a belief was by no means confined to the political right, but there was nothing especially militant about it. His nationalism was focused sharply in opposition to Germany, and specifically that nation's hegemony over musical culture. Hence, Sharp's advocacy of the placement of folksong in the educational curriculum in order to create a cultural environment in which a distinctly English movement in art music could flourish. Cole ignores this completely in his determination to identify more sinister motives. There's no evidence either that Sharp was personally fascinated by social Darwinism, although it was undoubtedly an important element in Fabian thinking. The really questionable claim on the list, though, is that Sharp favoured authoritarianism and had an antipathy towards liberal democracy. The inaccuracy here is off the scale. The key to the argument is a statement quoted in the biography by Fox Strangways and Maud Carpelli's regarding the prohibition of alcohol in the USA, of which Sharp strongly disapproved. One of the evils of democracy, he wrote to his son Charles, is that it is liable to become ruled by a tyrannous majority. One of the problems that democracy will sooner or later have to solve will be how by majority rule to protect minorities. Cole omits the context and the section about protecting minorities, which is hardly the remark of an authoritarian, and informs us simply that Sharp had written about the evils of democracy. He also chooses to omit another contribution by Charles Sharp regarding his father's politics, stating that any form of collectivist government must also be democratic if it is to function properly, which would have tripped up his claim of a proto-fascist ideology at the first fence. And this is from a writer who complains about the selectivity of folksong collectors and accuses Sharp of altering the facts to suit his theory. There's more. Sharp's desire to place folksong and dance on the school curriculum is conflated with the policies of Hitler and Mussolini, as though the songs of merriment and jollity that Sharp wished English children to learn were somehow comparable with the Hitlerjugend's militaristic travesties of folk songs. A comparison is drawn with Mussolini's advocacy of holiness and heroism, even though both religion and bellicose patriotism were anathema to Sharp. Cole's argument that Sharp was obsessed with politics, the authoritarian kind naturally, is also false. A claim that his diaries referred frequently to arguments about democracy can be refuted through a brief word search in the online archive. As for the statement that, to Sharp, quote, the individual songs and melodies had very little importance in comparison with the grand system they seemed to uncover, well, it's utter nonsense. It's very clear from all of his writings that Sharp delighted in the songs themselves above everything. Cole's prefixing of his most dubious claims with words like undeniable and unequivocal suggests desperation rather than confidence. The final chapter of The Folk spotlights a white supremacist American singer-songwriter, Paddy Tarleton, and tries to portray his inept guitar thrashing and crude, hate-filled lyrics as true descendants of a folk revival that, quote, has been adopted by right-wing nationalism. But no further examples of right-wing folk singers are produced, and Cole himself seems irritated that the sympathies of the folk song movement on both sides of the Atlantic remain firmly with the liberal left. Paddy Tarleton, moreover, clearly takes his musical inspiration from Irish rebel songs and 1960s American protest songs, neither of which owe anything to the English folk movement. US far-right policies is certainly a terrifying spectre, but the claimed affinity is beyond far-fetched. Despite his reported research specialism in music, Ross Cole shows no interest in or appreciation of English folk song. There's scarcely anything about actual music in his book, nor any understanding that its early enthusiasts might just have been motivated by its aesthetic qualities rather than by proto-fascist scheming. Cecil Sharp was not without his faults, of course. He had an unshakable belief in the correctness of his views, didn't suffer fools gladly, and be confrontational or subversive with rival colleagues. He did entertain racist opinions, although it's important to remember the context of his time and the fact that, even on the political left, such views were common. Even Marx and Engels have ugly skeletons in their cupboards on that score. Many of Sharp's theories have not stood the test of time, but any balanced assessment would recognise the huge contribution he made. The Folk is only the latest in a long line of publications in which the scholarship regarding Cecil Sharp is flawed, biased, or downright dishonest. It's full time that such questionable commentary be subjected to proper scrutiny and that a more balanced account be allowed to emerge of a flawed man whose achievements were enormous. I thank you.
So Ross Cole's got his hands up.
Good.
Yeah, we'll get Ross along next time. Thank you, Brian. That was tour de force. That was wonderful. Do we have any questions? Apart from Conrad and John, who are already. Anyone else want to get in first? No. Okay, Conrad, keep it brief, please, Conrad. Conrad, unmute.
Very good.
Conrad, are you going to talk to us?
No, turn him off.
I got it.
Right.
Okay, Sharp is known for bringing the folk artifacts into schools. We went through the same thing in the 50s and you having to learn square dancing. The idea that it can be learned. This is not something to be learned to be successful. It's something for enculturation. That's done in the family and in the community. You don't need to learn it. It's different. But he's also doing what he wanted to do, he set out to do, and he stuck sort of to it. He was interested in nationalism as all of his time, and that's what they did. And other people don't like that, but then again, the revolution of the second revival was not very pleasant either. That's it.
Thank you, Conrad. John Baxter.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of wanted. I've only read half the book, so I'm not completely with it yet. But I think points I'd want to make is one is the polemical tone set by Dave Harker in his book is something that comes from the way that Marxists argue with each other. And what I don't like is the fact that that has set up over the decades a confrontational setup for the way the argument is taken on board. And I think when Brian says there are things that Dave Harker raises that are important and we have to acknowledge, I think that's right. One of the weaknesses of Ross Cole's book is to do with
Put your hand up.
a certain.
You want to put your hand up?
There were things about the Fabians and the middle class folk song collectors, which could have been picked up by fascists. There were the germs of reactionary ideas in there, but there were lots of other germs as well. And history shows that what happened in this country is that the folk revival was largely left-wing, so other germs grew. I'm saying germs because what I think is missing is an understanding of how history works, and it's not something I'm an expert at, but I think what it shows is that even writing about folk music can require an engagement with how history works and quite sophisticated philosophy. So I agree that the language is irritating and unnecessarily academic in places, but it is something that I think we should engage with, and I think there are some useful things in the book.
Yeah, I certainly I tried to give it a bit of credence to the chapters about the Romantics and the folk song movement. I think there's some good stuff there, and you're quite right. The Fabians were not faultless. The Sidney and Beatrice Webb were notoriously anti-Semitic and so on. And I think your other point, I think, is also fair, but that these things can be put to different uses. I think in his final chapter, Ross Cole actually cites both Woody Guthrie and Ewan MacColl as sharing some of the same thinking with the far right singer-songwriter Paddy Tarleton, which is interesting. But for me, it makes the point that people can manipulate this stuff for whatever purpose they want, not that those evil purposes are necessarily present in the material to start with.
Vic, do you want to chime in? Vic?
Yeah, I think that was very good, Brian. It is this question of balance between a genuine critique, which is helpful and useful, and I mean, to me, Cole is. I won't read the book. I will not read it. I saw him at a conference, and I sat there listening to it, and I've tried to be supportive of him at one stage, but I asked him in the middle of the conference, what's the difference between what you're saying and what Dave Harker said in the 80s? And it was like I was the unwanted guest at the wedding, I think he's playing to an audience that isn't us.
Yeah, sure.
I think he's an academic who's managed to get a fellowship at Cambridge, and it's pretty hard in academia these days. I think he's taking all these elements which are worth discussing and just pushing them to extremes. I mean, it just seems to me that it isn't a rational balance sort of, we can have arguments, we can have discussions. I've criticised Sharp in writing in the past, but this is not what he's doing. He's just pushing it beyond the sort of into the lunatic fringe in a way. So I will not read the book, but thanks for the critique anyway.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think the danger is, and I think the same did happen with Harker, that was the outside of the folk movement that then became gospel, and I'm slightly worried that
that's absolutely right. I mean, I had a colleague when I was at Leeds say to me, "Oh, we don't have to bother with folk music; it's all fake anyway."
Yeah.
Harker said so, and that's a terrible indictment, because actually Harker's more intelligent than that. I mean, he's changed a lot. I mean, I think he wouldn't write folk song today. I mean, from being theoretical and that the particular sort of Trotskyite Marxist theoretism that he did. I mean, all the books now are just collection of they're almost mind dumps of facts. They're useful because they're so rich, but it's totally different. I haven't seen him for a few years now, but I still do consider him a friend, but a very strange and interesting friend.
Yeah, and I would certainly respect the work he's done on Northeast folk song and collections and so on.
Yeah, but picking up on Vic's point, and Brian's point, that Ross Cole isn't talking to us. No, he's talking to other people. But as Brian says, that it becomes the orthodoxy in the same way that Harker did in the 80s and right up to recently. And I thought that Harker's sort of baleful view had finally run out of steam, and that younger people that I know, new academics, were questioning and disagreeing with that orthodoxy. And I thought, oh, this is great. We've come out of the Harker era. But now we're right back in there again with Ross Cole, because the ethnomusicologists will read his stuff, and you know, the historians will read his stuff, and we're back to square one. And hopefully we can do something about that, starting with this talk, you know, today's talk and your review in the journal. Anyway, thank you. I think we better finish, hadn't we? Because we're just on time. No more comments. Thank you very much to our speakers today, all three excellent, and all on different topics, but they've all held together like we like it. And we'll be back on 9th of October for more of this kind of stuff. So thanks for coming. Thanks to our speakers. Cheerio, everybody.